So, tell us about your early days in the civil rights movement.
All right. Well, my early days in the civil rights movement would start around 1960, and then it would get into the real heat in 1963. But in 1960, I was in Louisville, pastoring at St. John AME Church. That was my second church, and when I got into the civil rights movement, Bishop Banks Tucker of the AME Zion Church and editor Frank Stanley of the Louisville Defender were the prime leaders in Louisville of the civil rights movement. And when it got real heated and they were trying to get some doors open, they had a march on 4th Street, where all the main businesses were centered, and they were calling for recruits out of the community to help them with the march down 4th Street. And so I was a young minister, and I pulled my Boy Scout troop from St. John AME Church, and we joined the procession marching down 4th Street. That was my introduction to the civil rights movement, and we had to endure the rock throwing from the people, bystanders along the side, the resistors to the civil rights program, as they threw their bricks and bottles, and we had to endure that. But we took that, and the meetings, the mass meetings, some of them were held at the Quinn Chapel AME Church on Chestnut Street, historic old Quinn, and that was my introduction to the civil rights activity. I mentioned Quinn Chapel because that was where Dr. Martin Luther King came to help inspire people to get their rights.
How was that experience with Martin Luther King, and what kind of turnout did you get at that time?
We got maximum. The churches were full, would fill up when Dr. King came to town. And so they got very positive results from that. And it was one of the times that the Louisvillians was right together. It's seldom that you can get people to come together on one thing positive, but they were all together. And so Dr. King had a master effect on him. He's a master speaker. And so they got good results. And so that got Louisville started in the right direction. Louisville was a typical southern city. You couldn't eat here, you couldn't go there, you couldn't vote here, there's so many things you couldn't do. But it was not like most southern cities, because there were many things they could do in Louisville that they couldn't do in Nashville or Memphis and whatnot. So Louisville was not quite like some of the southern places. We didn't have, we had privileges on the streetcars, you could ride anywhere that you could get a seat and all that, but there were places that you couldn't go, like stores and food counters in downtown, and clothes you couldn't put on in the shops where you shopped unless you bought in the black community.
From Louisville, where did your activism take you?
Well, after that period from 60 to 61, Bishop Ernest Lawrence Hickman moved me to Clarksville, Tennessee in 1961. And my mentor at that time was Robert Leslie Parker, who wanted me to get broader experience and to start moving upward. And so that was going to be an opportunity for me to move when I moved. However, I was going into a very typical southern city, and it was very impoverished. The black community was very impoverished. And so I had a great challenge. One of the things that I learned had been very helpful for me in my ministry, that I worked by, a philosophy that I worked by: find a need and fill it. And so when I got to Clarksville, there were many needs in the oppressed community, and my challenge was to fill the need, find a way and fix it. And so that was what I was going to set out to do. However, I was going with the advisement of my father, who was an experienced pastor here in Louisville, said to me, "Now, son, when you get to Tennessee, remember that you're not in Louisville." And he said, "Don't go getting into some type of activity that create problems. So just stick to your ministry." So he said, "You just stick to your church work. Don't get involved in anything other than that." And so I had made up my mind that that's what I would do. I would just go there and fix church problems, or the problems that my members had, and leave the rest alone. So I wasn't going there to do any civil rights struggles. I wasn't interested in that. I was just going there to be a good pastor. And so I went to Ebenezer and set up shop, got ready, and rolled up my sleeves and got ready to go to work. Now, I need to say that when I first got to Clarksville, there was another thing that I ran into. As a young minister, every week I had to prepare my messages, and I've always wanted to have something that was worth the time for people to sit down and listen to you. And I made it my practice to go to the library to prepare myself, where I'd have plenty of books and quiet, and could put together a good sermon. Unbeknown to me, black folks wasn't allowed in the library. And there I was going to the library to do my work. And nobody said anything. And then I asked to take for a library card when I got ready to exit. And they was kind of hesitant. But they did give me a library card and did grant me the privilege of taking my books home that I needed to check out. And so that was a first, because no black people had been permitted in that library, let alone check out a book. You couldn't read in there, and you could take a book out of there. And I had done both. So that had gotten me started down that road.
Let me ask you this: were you in your collar when you were into the church?
Yeah, I made a business of always wearing the collar, because it was a good practice, because it really was unsafe for a black person, an ordinary black male, to do anything that was extraordinary for black people. And there I was doing things like going to the library to get a book. But I always wore my collar. I wore a black suit and a white collar. And so I was doing things that I might have been arrested for. Just a little thing like getting a book. And because they were very ugly, in the South, to people of color. And so, yes, I always remembered that I was a pastor and carried myself as one. Now, I need to bring up the name of Lamel Carter. Reverend Lamel Carter was a pastor of the CME Church, a young man, well-trained and well-prepared. And he came to me one day and said, Dr. King is doing great things in the country, and we got to do something in our city. Nothing's going on here, and you have to lead it. And I said, I have to lead it. And he was a young person just like myself, and with a better academic background and everything. And so I wondered, why me? Why not you? But I didn't realize that at the time that their church, being a CME church, which was called the Colored Methodist Church, was financially underwritten by the Methodist Church South. And so part of their budget was always paid by the Methodist Church South. A budget, I'm talking about the budget of the CME Church. And so they got part of their financial support from the white people. And so his hands were tied, which I didn't understand that at the time. But his hands were tied. I was free because we didn't get money from anybody but the people that we pastored. They carried on their own financial support. The AME Church always was financed by black people. And so they didn't get money from elsewhere. So that made a big difference. I was free and he was not. And so I had been elected president of the Clarksville County Ministerial Alliance for the purpose of, to give leadership in these troubled times. And of course, being a young minister, I was very excited over the opportunity to be the president of ministers. And I was just a starter. I was just a beginner in this thing. I didn't realize that the ministers were trying to protect themselves from any situation that would require or challenge them to do something to help the people. I didn't realize that was what was their motive for electing me president, because they could see the handwriting on the wall that change was coming and they didn't want to have to lead it. Even though they had good positions and was well fixed, they wanted somebody else to do it. And it was going to fall my lot. But but along the road, I found a bank where I was going to do my banking, and started my account there. And I would go weekly and deposit my weekly salary. And one day they stopped me and said the president of the bank wanted to talk to me. And he was also the chairman of the chairman of the Chamber of Commerce. So he said, he asked me to come to his office. So I went to the office, and we sat down to talk. And then his question was, what is your view on civil rights? And so I said to him, I said, oh, you're not asking me a question that I should be, dealing with here, because I'm not here to deal with civil rights. I'm here to deal with the banking of my money for my account and the church's account. And he said, well, I'd just like to know. I said, well, I really wouldn't like to get into that, but if you insist, I think that all people should be treated fairly, and I think that you should treat people like you want to be treated, if that's what you really want to know about. And then he brought up an issue about how long they had been in banking, and that his grandfather had opened the bank, and his father had run the bank, and he was running the bank, and they never had no Negroes working in the bank. And so I said, well, my answer to that was, I said, well, you're taking money from Negroes. We're putting our hard-earned money in here, and I don't understand why you wouldn't hire from the people that support you. And he said, well, we don't believe in civil rights. And I said, I never even brought up the question. You brought it up. And so I'm just answering the questions, and you're not giving me any fair answers. So the banker, in answer to my statement, said, well, we're not going to have any civil rights here, and as long as I'm here. And I said, we'll see about that, won't we? We'll see about that. And I thanked him for his time and excused myself, and that was the end of the conversation. So I went right out, and we decided that I would have to do something about this. And I went to the chief of police, went to his office, and I told the chief that I'd had a talk with the president of the bank. And we had a conversation. I said, something will have to be done. I said, things are happening in our area, in the country, and that people were struggling for their rights, and that it's changing everywhere, and that change was coming to Montgomery County. And I said that the president of the bank made it clear to me that nothing was going to happen here, but that's not true. Something is going to happen, and it looks like either I will have to do it, or some outsiders will come in, like the communists. And I said, and of course the question is, do you want the communists in here messing up our city, or would you prefer for me to do it? And I said, and I'm going to do what I have to do, and if you're going to do some arresting, well, you can arrest me now. And he said, I don't want you in my jail. And so I said, well, then I'm going to go and do what I have to do. And I'll probably start today. And so the lot fell to me. So that day, on that same day, the day that I had my meeting with the chief of police, I prepared myself to go out and demonstrate. And the first place that I went to was a restaurant at the Northern Bank. They had a lunch counter. And I called Reverend John Rouse, pastor of the Baptist Church, to go with me to lunch. And that we would meet at the Northern Bank and go to the counter to eat. And so Reverend Rouse was a little hesitant about it, but he joined me there. And we sat down to have lunch at the Northern Bank restaurant. Now, the president of the Northern Bank, unbeknown to me, was not anti-civil rights. He was pro-civil rights. He was for our people being treated fairly. He was a very good man. And he turned out to be a very helpful friend over the years. But I didn't know that. He was just another white man to me, and I didn't know him. Had never met him. And I didn't do business at the bank, actually, at that time. But we had lunch, and of course, the waiters were black. And not only were they black, but they were nervous and they were frightened when I sat down to have, and the dishes were shaking in their hands as they served us. And so, but everything went well. But I did something before I went to the restaurant. I went in my office and called the sheriff, the chief of police, and told him where I was going. And then I proceeded to do what I was going to do. And apparently he called ahead of me and told him that I was coming. And so the manager knew that I was on the way, and I didn't have any incident. And not only did the manager know, but the owner found out that I was going to be, because as I was preparing to leave, the owner was standing at the door and he said, "Hello, Reverend Liggin." And I said, "How are you, Mr. Edmondson?" And he said, "Did you enjoy your lunch?" I said, "Yes, I did." I said, and I didn't know he was the owner. As a matter of fact, Mr. Edmondson was the former mayor of the city. And he had used me in his campaign in a disguised way. I didn't know he was using me, but he did use me. And so he was not against me. As a matter of fact, he went to help me. So everything went without incident. Now, as I think about, I said that my philosophy was find a need and fill it, or find a problem and solve it. In Clarksville, there were a lot of problems. And so it wasn't all about sitting down at a lunchroom counter to have something to eat. The problem of poverty. There was people lived in shacks everywhere. And they were very poor. Salaries were very low. Women worked for less than $1 an hour. Black men got $1 an hour. And black men who made money, some of them made $100 a week, but they worked 100 hours to get it. And so that was a lot of, that's a lot of work. And it was not unusual for them every so many weeks out of the month, a year, they would be in the hospital trying to build back up from the strain. And my salary at that time, I think, was $30 or $35 a week. And so I had 2 little girls, my wife and 2 little girls. And so it was a struggle to live on $35 a week. And I found out something when, after I had gotten up the road in civil rights, that not only were the black men being paid $1 an hour, but the low-paid white men were only getting $1.25 an hour. Neither one knew what the other was making. And I found out when an auxiliary of the police department invited me to be the speaker. These were all women, white women. And they invited me to be the speaker. And they told me that their husbands was just making $1.25 an hour. I said, that's only 25 cents more than the blacks are making. I said, why are we not working together? They said, that's why we invited you, because we all have the same problem. And so that never was really clearly announced in this country, that all people close to the bottom have the same problem, regardless of color. And they have the same enemy. And you have to know your enemy. And they try hard to keep us apart. That's why everything is scheduled and planned so that people are against each other without reason. They don't understand that they shouldn't be against each other. They should be helping each other. All right, so that was one of the problems that I would be working on, in addition to the struggles that my own people had. And so I've had a practice of having at Ebenezer a monthly forum to discuss community affairs. We named our organization the Committee on Community Action. I think that's what we called ourselves at that time. I'm thinking about committee a year now. But at any rate, and we later hooked up with the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. We later hooked into that. But this committee that I developed had the purpose of discussing on a monthly basis what was going on and how would we fix it. What were the situations that needed to be taken care of? And that's what we undertook to do in our city. And I called all of the leaders in my community and the people concerned to be present for these occasions. And so I had a large number of the leadership in the Black community. And I developed a publication that was a digest of all that was transpiring and the purposes and the reasons for what we were doing. And I put that, my secretary at that time was Estelle Jenkins, and Estelle and I put out this publication. I think we did it weekly. This publication, it was a bulletin with a digest of everything we were about and why. And it was very popular. We put it in barbershops and beauty parlors, grocery stores, and it was very popular. Not only was it popular in the Black community, but it was popular in the overall community. Everybody wanted that bulletin because I've always telecast what was going on and why. and who we were leading it. Because we didn't get any publication or advertisement in the newspapers. They had agreed not to tell anything about what we were doing. Anything that they said about us was listed as criminal activity. And so that was the only publication we got. And so we put out our own bulletin, and it went well. And so now, during our struggle, none of our people were ever arrested, and none of them were ever attacked during our struggle. Because I always made that telephone call to the chief of police, and we talked about what I was going to do and why. And he saw to it that I was able to work unmolested. And that didn't happen anywhere that I know of except in Montgomery County, Clarksville, Tennessee. I don't know if it happened anywhere else, but it happened there because that's the way I operated. I operated on the basis of logic and intelligence. And I never had anybody accosted or harmed. Now, but when we got ready, there was a change in the program when we got ready to go to the Shoney's chain restaurant in Clarksville. We decided not to tell anybody that we were coming. Just go. And we had it, I think I had going down there to that chain, the leaders was Dr. Fred Coleman, Dr. Paul Dumas, Reverend G.C. Jenkins, Reverend John Rouse, Wilma Rudolph, and myself. We were the leading people to head into Shoney's for dinner without an invitation. And the manager, when he saw us coming, trying to enter, came to the door and told us that black folks couldn't eat there, and locked the door. And so we just stood there, and we stayed there for 4 days. But we stopped the business. For 4 days, cars would just roll in and out of the parking lot and fill it up with black families in the cars. And nobody could come in, and nobody could go out. and that stopped that business. And so it got heated. It got so heated that the Klan had their people stationed along a railroad track overlooking Shoney's with guns. And then the other group came up on us in cars. And I had to pass through them to get what I wanted, which I did. I could hear them saying, "Here comes that Martin Luther King nigga. Here comes that Martin Luther King nigga." And they would let me in and out when I had to move around. And but on the backside of the railroad track were some more people. They were black veterans with guns. And they was waiting for the fireworks. And they was ready to take up the other part of the business, if necessary. And unbeknown to me, when the word got out, a truck was loading up at Fort Campbell with soldiers. And they was getting ready to come on the move, but they couldn't get out the gate with the truck because the word got to the headquarters. In the meantime, there was a meeting called of the top personnel, the mayor of the city, the president of the Chamber of Commerce, and from the county was the county executive, and on the phone was Governor Frank Clement. And we began to work out the strategy for where Clarksville was going from there. I was the fifth man. And we worked out the strategy. And I learned then that they weren't working according to a democracy. They decided within the power group where the city would be going. That's how they always worked. They decided that the elections and all of that was just outward appearance. But they was running the show, and there was a multimillionaire who was behind the whole screen, and he was my enemy, public enemy number one. He hated me. He owned the franchise for International Harvester, and he eventually put a contract on me, and one of my neighbors had the contract. They planned to get rid of me if they had to kill me. And they had, so there was there was a contract on me, but the Klan was after me too. So I was in between the two groups. But my protection was God. God took care of everything. He took care of me. That's why I'm here at age 93. Because he didn't let any of that work. All of it backfired on him. None of it worked. You can't beat God. I have to say with Reverend Ike, you can't lose with the stuff I use, because God's work and his way always works. Now, so at any rate, we get to the Shoney's thing, and in talking with the governor, he calls the owner of the chain and says that you're going to have to open up. So the chain of the whole Shoney's chain was opened from Clarksville, Tennessee. And I was the one who got that started. I was the one who was behind it. And then it began to happen all over the country. And it was happening everywhere, But it started at Clarksville. I opened it. I opened up the chain. And later on, I got a nice citation from Governor Frank Clement, for the work that I had done, and for the order that I had kept. I had been able to manage to keep any tragedies down, and at the minimum, it would have only been one, and that would have been me. And they were trying. It wasn't because they didn't try, they just didn't succeed. And so that gives you a kind of a foretaste of the activity, my activity in the civil rights. One of the problems that came up a little later was the entry of the Union at Frosty Moore Meatpacking Company when the AFL-CIO got their union in there. And I was credited with causing the union to be injected into that company's business, which I didn't have anything to do with it. But it happened that my members was following my example. And so these young men who were members of my congregation just picked up where I left off, and they got the union started. That's where the contract came out. one of the members of the union was an officer and a presiding elder in the AME church in Chattanooga, Tennessee. His name was Archie Griffin Jr., Sr. And Archie Griffin Sr. became my presiding elder when I was moved from Clarksville to Alcoa. And he became my presiding elder. But he came, not at that time, but later. But he and I met my first month in Alcoa. We met, and he told me that he had heard them talking about a black man in Clarksville they were going to kill, that they had hired a gunman to kill. And he went on to describe it, but he didn't know who the man was. And when he described him to me, I said, the man you're describing is me. I'm the man. And he said, well, the union had already found out what was going on. And they had picked up the word, but they didn't know who the man was. And the man was me. I was the man. But, and then I went right back in because my family was still living there. After I moved, my family was still living in Clarksville. And I went back when I chose and was in one of the meetings. And the mayor said, "Are you still here?" And I wondered why he asked a question like that. I said, "I definitely am." And so I wondered why he asked a question like that. Well, he knew about it because he was in on it. And so that's, I thought that was an awful strange question. And one of the reasons I was moved because they had paid an official in AME church to move me. And if I didn't move, the next step was for the gunman to do the moving. And so neither one of the things worked like they had planned because it all backfired, because God is above the devil. And so, so those are some of the things that happened, transpired. It's a very important story that everybody doesn't know. And when they try to write what happened without me in the story, they're missing the whole story because I'm the instigator. I was the father of it, and it started under my effort to find a problem and solve it, and that's what I went to work to do. And I got the work done. I got the job done. And it's interesting to see how the city has progressed, how it's changed. The lifestyle of the people are better. Even the harmony of the people is better. And it's just a different place. It's a different world than it was when I founded a rural southern town, kind of retarded in every way. And so that's a true story that I'm kind of glad to have the privilege to tell. That's not all of it, but that's some of the main features of it. Well, I'll talk a few minutes about an incident that we had closing out a big rally. We had a big community meeting at the C&Me church where the Reverend, where my friend was the pastor, Lamel Carter. And at the close of the meeting, we were making preparations to go to Shoney's. And at the close of the meeting, our family, our wives and children, were already in the car waiting on us. I came out of the building before, just a few minutes ahead of Reverend Carter while he was locking up. And as I started down some long stairs, a group of men jumped out of a car and tried to capture me. And we had some problems with a little Klan action. And these men came out of the car with the intentions of doing me some harm. But fortunately for me, I always had some people who were watching over me. As a matter of fact, many of the veterans who were in the community had an understanding that they would watch and make sure that I had protection at all times. And looked like out of nowhere, they came that night, that dark night, to my rescue. They came from all directions. And they frightened the people that were trying to capture me. As a matter of fact, they said, "Reverend, what you want us to do with them?" And I said, "Let them go." And so they flew out of there. And but I was so thankful that I had good rapport with all of my community. And so they saw to it that while I was doing the nonviolent crusading, that nobody caused me any harm. And so that was a blessing from God. Another occasion, I was going to my church one night after everything was over with to do some work, I think, in the office. And I didn't know that some people were hiding in the church, because I didn't lock up. I didn't have a practice of locking up things. I just left the building open. You could always go in. People wanted to go in and pray, they could. And I was so accustomed to and so familiar with my building that I didn't turn the lights on at night. I just go in, open the door, and go to my office, and then turn the light on. And so that night I went in, and as I closed the door and started down one of the hallways in the basement, I heard a door open and close behind me. And I knew somebody else was in there. And I hurried and got to a downstairs office. I had one upstairs and one downstairs. And when I got to that office, I flew a switch. And then you could hear people's feet trying to get out of there. And so it was just always something that you had to be on the alert. And so those were some of the experiences that I thought were interesting that I haven't forgotten in all these years.
So, how does your father feel about your experience?
Well, I didn't report to him because he had a negative attitude about the direction we were going in. And so I didn't report to him, but he and my mother were going to make a visit, and they made a visit in '63, right after all of the action at Shoney's was over, and we had a big victory. And my father came to town, and so he didn't call me at once, but he went right to a hotel. Well, prior to our activity, there was no hotels that they could go to before our work to change things. And so he got to this hotel, the Royal York Hotel, and when he went in, gave him his name at the desk. All the people were so polite and courteous, and they would jump in and say, "What can we get you? And what do you have? What do you need?" And so when he and I met a little later on that day, he said, "I didn't know the people knew me that well here in Tennessee." I said, "They don't know you." But when they heard the name, they thought it was me. And so you're in my territory now, Papa. and so you are getting courtesies that they meant to pay to me after some of the work that I have been doing in the city. And it happened that the hotel that he chose to stop in was owned by the same man who owned the restaurant that I opened earlier in our civil rights crusade. And so Mayor Edmondson owned both the hotel and the restaurant. And so he got a double bonus by me knowing the owner of both places and having good rapport with him. And so he didn't say any more about me and my crusading. And that's the end of the story. Yeah.
Okay.